The emergency beacon cut through the cosmic silence like a scream in the void. Marcus Chen had been drifting through the Kepler belt for 3 months, running salvage operations on derelict ships, when the distress signal reached his modified cargo hauler. The coordinates led him to a sleek reconnaissance vessel, its hull scarred by micrometeorite impacts and its engines dark against the starfield. But it wasn't the ship that made his breath catch, it was the voice that came through the comm channel when he attempted contact.
Unknown vessel, this is Captain Elena Vasquez of the exploration ship Meridian. My navigation systems are completely fried, and I'm running on emergency power. Can you provide assistance?
Marcus stared at the communication panel, his hands frozen above the controls.
That voice. Even through the static and years of separation, he recognized it instantly.
Elena Vasquez, the woman who had walked out of his life 7 years ago, leaving behind nothing but a note about needing to find herself among the stars. The woman whose departure had shattered every carefully constructed wall he'd built around his emotions, forcing him to confront the weak, dependent version of himself he'd always despised.
Copy that, Meridian. This is Marcus Chen aboard the Iron Phoenix.
I can dock with your ship and assess the damage. His voice came out steadier than he felt, years of solitary work having taught him to mask his emotions even from himself.
The silence that followed stretched for an eternity. When Elena's voice returned, it carried a tremor he'd never heard before. Marcus? Is that really you? Yeah, it's me.
He began the docking sequence, his hands moving with practiced efficiency while his mind reeled. Bringing my ship alongside your starboard airlock now. As the Iron Phoenix aligned with the damaged vessel, Marcus caught his reflection in the porthole. The man staring back bore little resemblance to the broken individual Elena had left behind. His face was leaner, marked by the focused intensity that came from years of working alone in the dangerous depths of space. His body had been hardened by the physical demands of salvage work, but, more importantly, his spirit had been forged in the crucible of absolute solitude. The airlock cycled with a soft hiss, and Marcus stepped aboard the Meridian. The ship's interior was dimly lit by emergency lighting, casting everything in an amber glow that made the familiar seem alien. He moved through the corridors with professional purpose, his diagnostic scanner sweeping for damage, but his heart hammered against his ribs like a caged animal. He found her in the engine room, crouched beside a burned-out navigation computer with tools scattered around her. Elena Vasquez looked exactly as he remembered and completely different all at once. Her dark hair was shorter now, pulled back in a practical style that highlighted the new lines around her eyes, lines that spoke of years spent staring into the infinite darkness between stars. She wore the standard issue exploration uniform, but it couldn't hide the way space had changed her, adding a quiet confidence to her movements that hadn't been there before. When she looked up and their eyes met, Marcus felt the universe tilt on its axis.
Hello, Marcus. Elena. He kept his voice level, professional. Let me take a look at your systems. She stood slowly, watching him with an expression he couldn't read. You look different. Stronger. Space changes people. He knelt beside the damaged computer, grateful for the excuse to avoid her gaze. The diagnostic scanner revealed extensive damage to the navigation array, but nothing that couldn't be fixed with the right components. Your NAV computer took a direct hit from what looks like a charged particle burst. Probably during that solar storm that swept through this sector last week. I've got replacement components on my ship. You can fix it? Marcus nodded, already calculating the work involved. Give me 6 hours, maybe 8. The ship itself is sound, you just need new guidance systems. He paused, finally, meeting her eyes. What are you doing out here, Elena? This is pretty far from any established trade route. She wrapped her arms around herself, a gesture he remembered from their shared past. Deep space cartography mission. I've been mapping uncharted systems in the Outer Rim for the Colonial Survey Corps. Her voice carried a note of something, pride, perhaps, or defiance. I told you I needed to find myself among the stars. Turns out I was right. The words hit him like a physical blow, but Marcus had learned to absorb pain without showing it. 7 years ago, those same words had destroyed him. Now,
They simply confirmed what he'd already known, that the woman he'd once loved had been right to leave, and that the man she'd left behind had needed to be destroyed for something better to take his place. "I'll get the parts," he said simply. Over the next several hours, Marcus lost himself in the familiar rhythm of repair work. His hands moved with practiced precision, replacing burned circuits and recalibrating navigation sensors. It was work he could do blindfolded, which was good because his thoughts kept drifting to the woman moving quietly around the ship, checking systems and running diagnostics of her own. Elena had always been brilliant with spacecraft operations, but there was something different about her now, a depth of knowledge and confidence that spoke of years spent pushing the boundaries of known space. She moved through her ship like it was an extension of herself, every adjustment and calibration performed with unconscious expertise. "You've gotten good at this," Marcus observed as he watched her realign the sensor array with surgical precision. 7 years of flying solo will do that to you." She glanced at him over her shoulder. "What about you? Last I heard, you were working corporate logistics on Mars. This is quite a career change." Marcus continued his work on the navigation computer, using the task to steady himself. "That was a long time ago. Different life." He didn't elaborate, and something in his tone discouraged further questions. They worked in companionable silence for a while, falling into an easy rhythm that reminded Marcus of their old partnership. Elena had always been the better pilot, while he'd handled the technical systems. Back then, they'd made a formidable team, until his own insecurities and need for control had poisoned everything between them. "Do you remember that time on Europa Station?" Elena asked suddenly, her voice carefully casual. "When the fusion reactors started overloading during that trade conference?" Marcus's hands stilled on the circuit board. "You jury-rigged a cooling system using the ice processors from the environmental section. Saved 3,000 lives. "We saved 3,000 lives, she corrected. "I couldn't have done it without your modifications to the power routing systems." "You could have done it without me," Marcus said quietly. "You always could. I just never wanted to admit it." The words hung in the recycled air between them like a confession. Elena stopped what she was doing and turned to face him fully. "Is that what you think? That I left because I didn't need you?" Marcus set down his tools, finally, ready to have the conversation he'd been avoiding for 7 years. "I think you left because I was weak. Because I needed you more than you needed me, and that scared both of us." He met her gaze steadily. "You were right to go. The man you left behind was pathetic, jealous, controlling, terrified of being alone. He needed to be destroyed." Elena's expression softened. "Marcus." "No, let me finish." He stood, crossing to the observation port where the starfield wheeled slowly past. "After you left, I fell apart completely. Lost my job, my apartment, most of my friends. Spent 6 months in a bottle, feeling sorry for myself and blaming everyone else for my problems." He turned back to her. "Then, one day I realized something. The man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others. So I did. I destroyed every weak, needy, pathetic part of myself and built something better from the wreckage." "And became a salvage operator?" "Became someone who doesn't need anyone else to validate his existence." Marcus gestured around the ship. "Out here, in the dark between stars, you learn what you're really made of. You face your fears, your weaknesses, your deepest insecurities, and you either overcome them or they kill you. There's no middle ground, no one else to blame or lean on. Just you and the void." Elena was quiet for a long moment, studying his face. "You sound like you're trying to convince yourself as much as me." The observation stung because it carried the ring of truth. Marcus had spent years building walls around himself, convincing himself that complete self-reliance was strength rather than simply another form of fear. But seeing Elena again had cracked those walls, letting in doubts he thought he'd conquered. "Maybe I am," he admitted. "But it doesn't change the fact that I'm not the same man you left. That man was weak, and weakness makes you vulnerable." "I won't be vulnerable again." "And what about connection? What about love?"
Are those weaknesses too? The question hit like a plasma charge to his chest.
Marcus turned back to his work, using the familiar motions to center himself.
Love is the ultimate vulnerability. It gives someone else the power to destroy you completely. Or it gives you something worth fighting for. I've seen what happens when you build your identity around another person, Elena. When they leave, there's nothing left. I won't make that mistake again.
Elena moved closer, her footsteps soft on the deck plating.
What if you're wrong? What if the man I fell in love with wasn't weak at all? What if he was just scared, and, instead of facing that fear, he convinced himself he needed to become someone else entirely?
Marcus's hands trembled slightly as he fitted the final component into place.
That man let you walk away without a fight. He watched the best thing in his life disappear because he was too proud and too afraid to admit he was wrong. How is that strength?
Sometimes letting someone go is the strongest thing you can do, Elena said softly. And, sometimes, when they come back, it means something different than when they left. The navigation computer hummed to life, its displays flickering as the new systems came online. Marcus ran a full diagnostic, confirming that all systems were operational.
The repair work was complete. Elena's ship was fully functional again.
She could leave whenever she wanted, just as she had 7 years ago.
Your ship's ready, he said, not turning around. Navigation, propulsion, life support, everything's green across the board. Thank you.
Her voice was closer now, almost directly behind him.
Marcus, look at me.
He turned slowly, and found her standing just an arm's length away. This close, he could see the tiny flecks of gold in her brown eyes, the same ones that had captivated him during their first meeting at the academy. But there was something new there too, a depth of experience and understanding that hadn't been there before. I didn't leave because you were weak, Elena said. I left because we both were. We were so afraid of losing each other that we were strangling what we had. I was just as dependent on you as you were on me, Marcus.
I just hit it better. Then, why did you go?
Because I knew that if we kept going the way we were, we'd destroy each other.
We needed to become whole people separately before we could be whole together.
She reached out, her fingers barely brushing his hand. I needed to prove to myself that I could survive alone, that I was more than just half of a couple. And you needed to learn that your worth wasn't dependent on my opinion of you. Marcus stared down at their almost touching hands.
And, did you? Prove it to yourself?
Elena smiled, and it was like watching a star ignite. I've spent 7 years mapping the unknown, pushing into spaces where no human has ever been. I've faced solar storms, equipment failures, and isolation that would break most people. I've learned that I'm stronger than I ever imagined.
She paused.
But I've also learned that strength without connection is just another form of emptiness.
What are you saying?
I'm saying that maybe we've both learned what we needed to learn.
Maybe we've both become the people we needed to become.
Her fingers closed around his.
The question is, what do we do now?
Marcus felt the walls he'd built around himself beginning to crumble. For 7 years, he'd told himself that complete independence was the only way to avoid being hurt again. He'd convinced himself that needing someone else was weakness, that love was vulnerability, that the safest course was to remain forever alone among the stars. But, looking into Elena's eyes, he realized that perhaps the greatest weakness of all was refusing to risk being weak.
The man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others, but what if that man also destroys the possibility of genuine connection, of growth, of love?
I'm terrified, he whispered.
Of me? Of wanting something I might lose again.
Of going back to being that pathetic, dependent person I was before. Elena stepped closer, close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her body.
What if instead of going back, we went forward? What if we took everything we've learned, all the strength we've built, and used it to create something new?
I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to be strong and vulnerable at the same time.
Neither do I, Elena admitted.
But maybe that's what makes it worth trying. Marcus looked out at the star field beyond the observation port, at the infinite darkness that had been his companion for so long. Out there was safety, the cold certainty of solitude, the protection of emotional walls built from years of hard-won independence. But, here, in this moment, was something else entirely. Here was the possibility of connection without dependence, of love without loss of self, of strength that came from choosing vulnerability rather than avoiding it. "My ship is configured for long-duration solo missions," he said finally. "Plenty of space for two people, if they were willing to work together."
"Are you asking me to come with you?" "I'm asking if you'd consider a partnership. Equal partners, independent but connected. We could combine our skills, your cartography expertise with my technical knowledge. There's a lot of unmapped space out here."
Elena was quiet for a moment, and Marcus felt his heart hammering against his ribs like a desperate thing. This was the moment of truth, the point where she would either stay or go, where his newfound strength would either prove sufficient or crumble under the weight of his old fears.
"There's something I need to tell you first," Elena said.
"The reason I'm out here, in this particular sector, it wasn't random.
I've been tracking your movements through the salvage networks for the past year.
When I saw your name on the registration logs, I knew I had to see you again." Marcus felt something crack inside his chest, not the breaking of walls, but the breaking open of possibilities he'd thought were forever close to him.
"You came looking for me?"
"I came looking for the man I fell in love with. Not to go back to what we were, but to see if we could become something better." She smiled again, that radiant expression that made the stars seem dim by comparison.
"I think we can."
Marcus reached up with his free hand, cupping her face gently. The gesture felt both familiar and completely new, like remembering how to breathe after years of holding his breath.
"I'm still scared," he said. "Good. That means it matters."
When he kissed her, it wasn't the desperate, hungry kiss of their youth, filled with need and possession and fear of loss. It was something deeper, a connection between two people who had learned to stand alone and were choosing to stand together. It was the kiss of equals, of partners, of two strong individuals who had discovered that true strength sometimes meant allowing yourself to be vulnerable. They separated slowly, foreheads touching, breathing the same air and the quiet hum of the ship's systems. "So," Elena said softly.
"Partners?" "Partners," Marcus agreed. "But we do this right.
No losing ourselves in each other, no going back to the old patterns. We remain whole people who choose to share their lives."
"Agreed. And if either of us starts slipping into old habits, we call it out immediately. No letting problems fester. And we maintain our independence."
"Your ship, my ship, joint missions by mutual agreement."
Elena laughed, a sound like silver bells in the darkness. "Look at us, negotiating our relationship like a trade contract." "Maybe that's what we needed 7 years ago," Marcus said. "Clear boundaries, honest communication, respect for each other's autonomy." "Maybe it is."
She stepped back, but kept hold of his hand.
"So, Captain Chen, what's our first joint mission?"
Marcus considered the question, his mind already racing with possibilities. "There's a string of uncharted systems about 50 light-years from here.
Colonial Survey has been wanting detailed maps for possible expansion.
It would take 1 ship years to cover all of them, but 2 working in coordination
could cut the time in half and provide redundant data for accuracy." Elena's eyes lit up with professional excitement. "I like it. When do we start? How about right now?"
"Your ship has better navigation computers, mine has more extensive workshop facilities. We could sync our databases, plan our route."
"Marcus." Elena squeezed his hand. "Are you sure about this? Really sure? Because if we do this, there's no going back.
We'll have to face every fear, every insecurity, every old wound.
We'll have to trust each other completely."
Marcus looked around the ship where he'd found her again, this vessel that had carried her through 7 years of self-discovery in the vast emptiness between stars. He thought about his own journey, the long process of building strength from the ashes of his former self, the hard-won knowledge that true power came not from avoiding vulnerability but from choosing when and how to be vulnerable. The man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others. But perhaps there was another truth equally important. the man who learns to be strong can afford to be vulnerable with the right person. Perhaps the greatest strength of all was the courage to love without losing yourself, to connect without sacrificing independence, to build something together that made both people stronger than they could ever be alone.
I'm sure, he said. But, Elena? If we're going to do this, we're going to do it right.
No shortcuts, no assumptions, no falling back on old patterns. We communicate everything, trust completely, and never let fear drive our decisions.
Agreed. She grinned.
Besides, someone has to keep you from getting too comfortable in all that hard-won independence of yours. And someone has to make sure you don't get lost in the dark between stars again.
I wasn't lost, Elena said softly. I was finding my way back to you.
As they began transferring data between their ships and planning their route through the uncharted systems, Marcus reflected on the strange turns his life had taken. 7 years ago, he'd been a broken man watching the woman he loved disappear into the infinite night. Today, he was a skilled salvage operator who had rebuilt himself from the ground up, and she was an accomplished deep space explorer who had mapped territories no human had ever seen. They were different people now, stronger, more complete, more aware of their own worth and capabilities. But perhaps that was what made this new beginning possible. They weren't trying to recapture what they'd lost, but to create something entirely new from the foundation of who they'd become. The repair work was complete.
Elena's ship was fully operational, her navigation systems restored to perfect functionality.
She could leave whenever she chose, return to her solitary mission among the stars. But, instead, she was choosing to stay, to build something together with a man who had learned that true strength sometimes meant allowing yourself to be vulnerable with the right person. You know, Elena said as she watched him calibrate their joint navigation systems, I never thanked you properly for fixing my ship.
It's what I do, Marcus replied with a slight smile. Fix broken things. Even broken people?
He looked up from the console, meeting her eyes.
We weren't broken, Elena.
We were just unfinished. Sometimes it takes traveling to the edge of everything to figure out who you really are.
And, sometimes, she said, it takes finding the right person to travel back with.
Outside their joined ships, the universe stretched in all directions, infinite, dangerous, beautiful, and full of undiscovered wonders. There were solar systems to map, phenomena to study, mysteries to unravel. There were also dangers to face, challenges to overcome, fears to confront. But they would face them together, as partners, as equals, as two people who had learned that the greatest strength came not from standing alone but from choosing to stand with someone else.
The coordinates for their first joint mission were locked in.
Their ships were prepared for the long journey ahead. All that remained was to take that first step into the unknown, together.
Ready? Marcus asked. Ready, Elena confirmed.
And, together, they launched themselves into the starfield, two ships flying in perfect formation toward a future neither could have imagined alone. Behind them, the darkness of space held no more terror, it was simply the canvas upon which they would paint their new beginning. The man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others. But, the man who learns to be strong can choose to share that strength with someone worthy of it. And, sometimes, if he's very fortunate, that person will choose to share their strength with him in return. In the vast emptiness between the stars, Marcus Chen and Elena Vesquez had found something more precious than all the salvage in the galaxy. They had found their way back to each other, and forward to something entirely new.